Can you hear me? Okay, thank you. Now we would like that you do some work group, and the work we'd like you to do is to try to define policy goal indicators. So we ask you to split in 6 groups, and you can choose if you want to work on policy goal number 1, or policy goal number 2, or policy goal number 3. We have available 6 rooms. The room 301 and 302, we would like to have there people interested in defining indicators for policy goal number 1. And in rooms 316 and 326, we would like people to try to define indicators for policy goal number 2. And here in the auditorium, we can have a group to define policy goals number 3. And we have another room, 330, that is also addressing policy goal number 3. We have some papers to help your work. We have some copies of the slides that Andreas showed you to follow. And we also have some spare sheets for you to use during the discussion. We have no much time for this, we just have 1 hour. So our suggestion is that you discuss and try to define indicators during half an hour, 30 minutes. After that, as you can see, we have 2 groups discussing indicators for each one of the policy goals. So let's say around 2 o'clock, the leaders of each group can join to compare and try to summarize the work that was delivered. And at 2:15 minutes, we'll come back for a plenary session where each leader of each group will present the work produced. So I hope you understand my suggestion. Yes, Kathy? Okay, Philip?
Can I ask a question just to clarify the purpose of the indicators? Is your thinking that these would be a set of indicators that the network would share with the European Commission or others, say these are the sorts of things that you need to look at if you want to promote good school leadership?
Yes, of course.
That's the idea?
Yes, but we know, we are aware that it's very difficult to define indicators. So the main goal here is you are working in defining indicators to become aware how difficult it is. But it's a rehearsal to define indicators, actually. I don't know if Andrea wants to add something else. Yes, Kathy?
I just want to read the definition of the preliminary definition of indicators is part of one of our deliverables. I was very careful, and so was Andrea, from what I promised that we did not say definition of indicators, but toward the definition of. So it is a starting point to give the orientation of what indicators on school leadership might look like in the future. It would have been great if we could deliver a set of indicators, estimate and so on, but I don't think that in the remaining period we can do that. Therefore, we have to provide indications for indicators. Clear? Good.
Can I add another question?
Yes.
Do you foresee any kind of relationship with these indicators to the European training and education and training model? which has been started, but there are huge questions about it, I think.
At this point, no. At this point, we are testing, we are totally playing with the idea of coming up with indicators. It is not an easy task to perform, as Andreas mentioned at the very beginning. What we will have to do with this set of preliminary indicators in the future is something I cannot tell you right now.
I'm just asking because I talked to the MRS, and I said that I have concerns. In the field of rights of the child, there's always two different reports, one by the government and one by NGOs. And in this case, I told them that even in the field of education and training, there should be a kind of counterpart to the self-promotion of government in education and training monitoring. I think this could be a good civil tool where professionals can add something to it.
That's why we all collaborate towards whatever is developing at NOS.
Okay.
Can I further explanation on this? Okay, of course, governments use their role.
You need the microphone.
Of course, more.
Of course, governments produce their own indicators to support their own reports, all right? And also NGOs or networks like us produce their own indicators to monitor and evaluate policy implementation or policy development in an area. I think that our mission, in a way, is to, in this part of our work, is to develop a framework of indicators, something like dimensions and something like exams of indicators, where we can, in the future, monitor as network, for example, or maybe policymakers want to use it, in order to see how they progress in the policies they define. Okay? So yes, governments can hijack this process, but it's also us, independent government networks, to provide this kind of information. Of course, there are some standards in using these indicators. I mean, how you develop indicators, there are standards, so they should be followed. And we are here to ensure that, for example, we develop a framework, a methodological framework on how to collect and how to choose and how to implement these indicators.
So, if you don't mind to leave your seat and try. Yes, Kathy?
Yes, we need the leaders. We need the two leaders for each goal. Okay, these leaders will write down
Notes to
notes.
present at the plenary.
They will meet with their counterpart on the same goal. They will discuss for 5 minutes, 10 minutes on what were the results. And then they will come back here and present the outcomes of this working discussions. Okay?
The rooms are on the left, all along the corridor. The rooms are also signed, and Davlos have a paper to support the work you do.
Okay. Let's see the goals. Yes. So these are the goal number 1 is establishing an enabling school leadership environment. So who is offered for this?
Well, you, Kathy.
Sorry, but I need clarification between A and C. Because
Okay.
I think that A is embedded in C.
Okay, yes. Of course, these policy goals are interconnected, but we as ECNOSO have identified all these goals that they have their own unique characteristics. For example, school leadership capacity building is mostly has to do with the capacity, the skills, and the actions of school leaders and how we can support them directly through training, through standards, through evaluation, things like that, not, through capacity building approaches.
May I?
Yes?
The papers we have copied, each goal has the action lines described in them. So people have support documents to support their work. So we are, without much time now, I think it's time to do some work group, actually. So you have here the three, is just to try to find the room in which people can work. Well, before to continue with the coffee break, first I would like to invite the leaders of the groups to come up to the stage and to present the conclusions. We start with policy goal number 1. So I think I have 2 groups that have been working on policy goal number 1. Please come to the stage.
It's a quite long list of indicators. So the first indicators are about input, and this first one is trust. The second one is regulations, and we mean that these regulations are negotiated, that headmasters or principals participating working out these regulations, and these are not top-down regulations. Then cooperation, support and involvement of stakeholders, shared understanding of the aim of the school, that the school is for students and society and not for teachers and principals. And it is important that the partners are informed and trained. It is important that society supports principals. They get salary, decent salary, and also the last in this list, what we managed to do is that we have a minimum curriculum. That the state curriculum describes the minimum level, and each school has a right to just work out its own curriculum. Then on the process level indicators, first is transparency, then there should be questionnaires finding out the opinions of parents, teachers, students, and these opinions are taken into account. There is a support for principals, and the different principals need different support. And also the final indicator is that the system is flexible. If the school and the principal are ready for greater autonomy, there will be greater autonomy. If they are not ready for greater autonomy, there will be less autonomy. So it is flexible, not the same for all schools and all principals. Then output indicators. Here we had some difficulties, but some indicators anyway. First is the number of involved people who support the headmaster or principal. Then that there should be a career system, that there are many people who want to become principals. And also, of course, standard. It is a result of some other working group, but the standards should also support and contract with this. principal will support. Then outcome indicator, it's my personal opinion that the outcome should be different from expected. Then it is good. Then it is development. If we get only results what we expect, there is no development. And impact indicators, leaders want to be leaders, not only to become leaders, but also to be leaders. And the other, what I very much like, is that leaders want to create more leaders. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Actually, it happens that in our groups, the majority were representing parents' organizations, so it's a little bit like parental view on these questions. Actually, we lacked time, so when we ran into discussions, and it was 5 minutes an hour. And what we discussed firstly regarding school autonomy for equity in learning, as an input indicators, we defined that there must be extra funding for special needs and sufficient financing for school, as well as the question is about society tolerance towards equity. With regard to process, we asked whether or not there is regulation which promotes both school autonomy and school equity, and that school works more on equity. And also, if the regulations gives time for teachers to give additional time for students with special needs. We also discussed whether teacher and also school leadership trainings education is focusing on equity. And also we discussed that whether or not school evaluation is narrowly focusing on academic performance, because that makes schools preferring students with better performances and with less needs. And then we discussed distributed leadership, and here we didn't went too far. The one question what we discussed as output indicator is how many people from a school are involved in leadership training, and whether or not there are existing committees at school, working groups which promotes networking among school team. And as an outcome, we also asked whether or not the networking really happens. So, because what we see as a parent, sometimes you have enough different committees, parental council and what else, but the networking is not really taking place. And also the question was, what is the internal school culture towards leadership? So if the internal school culture, which is driven by school leader, is more based on authorities, or the school leader is accepting contribution from other school members and also is supporting that contribution. So that was all from our group. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And policy goal number 2, I think we just have one group, wasn't it? And it was Jackie, the facilitator, but you have to represent it. Okay, thank you. Come on.
Perfect. So, in a surprise move, Jackie first volunteered to be the chair of our group, and then she split the group into 3 parts and gave us all lots of autonomy and trust. And then I was kind of leading a group all of a sudden. So thanks for that, by the way. And now I'm also standing here, and I have no idea what I'm talking about. We were charged with coming up with some indicators for the first sub-goal. Establishment and implementation of school leader professional standards for equity in learning. We came up with 7 indicators, which we'll just give you straight away. Are these professional standards part of the systematic annual professional review? That's something you can measure. Are professional standards part of the reaccreditation process for teachers and for school leaders? Is equity part of the school mission statement? Are professional standards part of the head teacher's program, initial and continuing professional development? Are professional standards part of the selection process for head teachers? Is evidence collected by the students or other stakeholders feel kind of fairly treated in different schools? And are equity goals part of the school's development plan? So 7 easy to measure indicators, something you can just kind of work on straight away.
Thank you very much. Please. Yes, please.
Presentation because my English is too bad. Okay, we focused about leadership evaluation, and our aim is to fix standards and indicators about that. We have a lot of difficulties to fix a common standard in each country because we have different cultures, we have a lot of various strategies and different rules and function by the head teacher with a different also background, cultural background and knowledge. But we found a lot of opportunities to exchange our discussion about similar aims, similar principles and values in our country, about the function and the rules of our schools in our countries. We have the same responsibilities to manage and to lead a school. We have also a principle to account inside and outside our action, our strategy. And we discussed about the evidence. All of the parameters are based on evidence in the field. And so we focus on process and outcomes, because the other dimension, like salary or something, are external of our mind or our function in this project. Now we focus about 3 dimensions: the participation, the results, and the development of the teachers. How can we how can the headmaster can help these strategies, these dimensions inside the school? We focus about all of the stakeholders, not only students, not only teachers, not only parents, but also networking, association, local administration, and so on. How can the school can reach a focus, a central point of this kind of partnership in our local area? About outcomes, about results, we suggest to analyze not only the national testing or the testing inside our school, but also the behavior, the wellness, the well-being inside our school, and how can we reduce the gap, especially with the different background, cultures and social and economic students and so on. And
Also, we focus about not only the lowest level of our students, but the highest level. We reflect, we think in our school more and more how can we reduce, how can we help the lowest level of our students. But I think it's important to help and to develop the highest potential students. And one of the instruments that we have to reflect is how can make a flexible curriculum. What percentage can put in our curriculum to reach what I say before. And the last but not least is about the development of the teachers. How can develop the way to teach and to learn about peer observation, about peer review, and what time, how many times we spend not only in lessons but in cooperation and collaboration with colleagues, and how can we support maybe someone has difficulties in her classes, what instruments can we put in our school in that way. Okay, thank you.
Policies and school leader strategies and practices that promote equity and learning. Actually, in the working group, we didn't really focus on measurable input and output indicators, but more on practical steps we could take to promote the research to identify school leadership. So we started with the EU level, and in our view, it could be good to create a database, a European database on research regarding school leadership, and also collect best practices and studies so that this information is available to all stakeholders, all countries in the EU, and that not everyone has to do the same research over and over again in different countries. Furthermore, the ministry should execute a mapping study so it could identify what the current practices are, collect data, describe the trends in the area of school leadership, look also at the skills that are needed for school leaders and at qualifications that are used or are used as a the qualifications for school leaders they need before they can enter the profession of being a school leader. Then at school level, it's important that at school level they base their policies regarding leadership on research. So it should be evidence-based research they use in their own policies, so at school level. Furthermore, what's important that there is a kind of network for peer learning between different schools, but also between different regions or local authorities, so that they can share the different practices that are in place in schools, and that they also identify the practices that work best and that they can also implement in other schools. Then, of course, leadership is about vision, having a vision. You have to know what the beginning is, so your starting point and where you want to go. And in our view, it's only possible to reach that point if you have the involvement of all different stakeholders. So it's not only the school leader who can set the vision and execute the vision, but all the different stakeholders should be involved in that. And therefore it's also important to consult those stakeholders, so students, parents, education employers, trade unions, local governments, also ministries, so that you have a complete picture of the vision of these different stakeholders, and that they also can be aware of what they can contribute to reach this vision. And as the last point, we mentioned that it's important that there's research conducted into the effectiveness of leadership training, so that it's not only about creating policies, but that you also check what the effect is of the policy, if it's working or not, that you evaluating the policy, and that you include the feedback that arises, include that feedback in the policies, and also in this way improve the policies.
Thank you very much. And now we have the policy doc number 3. We have Professor Woods and another group, I guess, isn't it? Okay, please come. Because we have no time, I imagine, for you to interview, so we have to follow. One presenter first.
Right, this is the group that met in the auditorium. My thanks to Amanda Roberts, my colleague, for taking the notes. We had a lot of discussion, and I think there'll be quite a bit of work to formulate these into indicators, but I'll try and give a summary and hope that reflects what came through the discussion. I'm sure my colleagues in the group will let me know if it doesn't. So first of all, we had some discussion about the priority amongst these different elements, and there was some feeling that the selection of head teachers, the bottom one there, was a top priority. There was some discussion which also gave a lot of priority to professional development, which also appears there. And there was also some debate about whether selection belongs under this policy goal or should be under a different policy goal. In relation to capacity building, we have to think about how people become school leaders and how they are chosen. And some people felt that what they're thinking about capacity building is about the development which takes place before recruitment and selection, not just what takes place afterwards. We had some debate or some discussion about flagship initiatives and what they mean at the top there. And there was some shared understanding of what was meant by the word flagship, but it was observed in some countries that flagship initiatives are more of a bottom-up activity, and that they take a long time to develop, and there it would be perhaps better if they were a top-down initiative. But in some countries, like in England for example, flagship initiatives are a top-down thing. They come from government and they have resources put into them, and they get going very quickly, for better or for worse. The point was also made that to develop flagship initiatives for equity and learning, we need to develop a deep understanding of social justice, and that you would then develop an innovative scheme, a flagship scheme, which then puts this into operation to see how effective it actually is. Indicators. Some of the points that went into our thinking about indicators. First of all, the need for a clear conception of the meaning of equity, and I'll be referring to equity again because it occurred in different ways in the discussion, and some reflection will be needed about how coherently you deal with these approaches to equity. The second point is the importance of the development of leadership capacity across the school as an indicator, about being an indicator. And then a number of elements that relate to professional development. One point that was made that the existence of multiple capacity building programs in a country was an important indicator. Are there any? How many are there? And in addition to that, who funds those capacity building programs for leadership? Very important question, because who funds them will shape the nature and the values, etc., of those capacity building programs. The second point was that development of a dynamic model of what is meant by equity. The third point is having a model of leadership development which encourages critical reflection. So that it's important that inbuilt into the idea of being a leader or contributing to leadership is also about thinking critically and reflecting on all sorts of things, including the kind of policies that you're being asked to work within. Capacity building that includes developing leadership capacity within and across the schools, I've mentioned that, so that should be in the professional development approach, programs that do that. They help to develop leadership capacity within and across schools. Another indicator, the existence of learning resources that include developing leadership, learning resources which reach people in practice-orientated activities and resources, and that are communicated in innovative ways using digital and web-based resources that are attractive and useful and capable of being accessed and used by practitioners. Those are important. We had some debate about the importance of communication of research and academic work in relation to practitioners, about how that needs to be done in ways that practitioners can understand, that they can relate to. It was acknowledged that researchers or academics don't necessarily have to do it themselves, or not all academics have to do it themselves, because you need to have a range of critical academic research and academic thinking, some of which will be very academic, but somewhere along the line it's useful, or there's a need to have this communicated in ways that practitioners can really relate to, busy practitioners can really relate to. But also a point was made that some feel that academics do produce relevant work, but that ministries need to promote these. So it's not just about what academics and researchers do, but also about what ministries are doing. Capacity building will help the selection process for head teachers. We need to find out what principals need in order then to be able to support them. So the idea here that important in the system was some kind of process by which you are learning, or practitioners are communicating and being asked, well, what do you need, what do you feel you're lacking, what is important to you? So it's not just a transmission process down. We need to learn about attitudes which principals hold towards equity in learning. And the point was being made there that it's about personal development, not just professional development in terms of skills and capabilities, but it's also about personal development when you're talking about a deep issue such as equity. And then a final point is that attention was drawn to a tension between the system which requires or looks at equity in a certain way, as opportunities as measured in certain narrowly defined ways on the one hand, and how it is actually, how equity or injustice is actually takes place within schools. And in relation to leadership capacity, that seems to suggest that if you are developing leadership capacity across the schools, we're involving not just senior leadership, but teachers and support staff, and students as well. If you're doing that properly, then this in itself is developing equity in a broad sense. And that concludes the deliberations of one group. Thank you very much.
try to very, very much summarize the work of our group that was headed by René. There was a little bit of confusion, do we need a leader, do we not? And he decided to have a leader. And he pointed out himself, and I said, okay, I'll do the writing. It took a while. I don't know, Mika, is he still here? Oh, Mika. Where is Mika? It took a while before we understood that he understood what was the assignment. But finally he understood, and also we, because he reflected actually the misunderstandings. And then he said, what we need maybe is looking at the input for school leaders, like proactiveness, so the willingness to become a school leader, and school leaders training, of course. And from Germany we said, well, we had some assessment centers to see if we can have, let's say, the selection at the door, selection, career and succession of school leaders. We didn't cover everything. So that was also very important, but it failed after a while. And still in Austria, they have a kind of questionnaire on the internet to see if you are allowed to come into this leadership academy. Another thing what was difficult, of course, to understand, because as far as I understand, everything comes from quality care. Also, the policies should be of high quality. And there's differences between criteria, indicators, critical success factors for policy formulation, and how it can be implemented, and how those policies can be executed. What we would like to give as an idea is that there's going to be a kind of a European school leader training, so that universities work together so that we can address in a European school leaders training the European issues like equity and learning, like academic learning. The appraisal system for all the school leaders training schools. And then there was another one, and it's maybe a little bit of a catchphrase. Let's not try to simplify the complex reality by indicators, because as we know, PISA, the effect of PISA in some schools is that kids are trained to reproduce in the right form, all these testing. And well, you can argue if this is the way we want to look at things. So one of the criteria or the ideas behind this set of criteria or this indicators framework, policy indicators framework, should be also that you really should see that measures or policy measures or actions reflect what school leaders want, what scientists think is a very good idea. So it's kind of a package deal, it's holistic, and that we can say, okay, this is going the right way if we implement that kind of policies. So that's a difficult indicator maybe, but I'm sure the scientists come up with an answer.
Okay, thank you.
I hope I was clear enough. It was very difficult to summarize it.
Okay. I want to thank you all for your patience and for delaying your coffee break so many minutes. But just one thing, I would like to write here Andreas' email, because he would like very much you send him your notes. So please, right.